Round 2, fight!
As gamers, it would be fair to say that the 1990s gave us not only some of the greatest video games ever made, but also some of the best FPS games ever. And while they may look and play a bit on the dated side today, their impact and influence on the genre really can't be understated. This was the decade that established the genre as one of the most popular with gamers. Putting you directly in the shoes of the protagonist, FPS games allowed you to explore different worlds across different genres, be they as a hardened space marine on Mars, an undead gunslinger, or a trophy hunting extraterrestrial. There were even some noticeable additions to consoles, a platform long thought unable to effectively do the genre justice due to the limitations of a control pad over that of a mouse and keyboard. The FPS genre even managed to buck the trend and provide a decent film license game, a rarity even still today. One FPS game that managed to single-handedly redefine the genre was Half-Life, Valve's 1998 debut that took everything that was great about the genre, threw in an engrossing storyline, pulse-pounding action, revolutionary for the time AI,
Okay, I'll cover you.
and let's be honest, a level of detail in games we'd never seen up until then.
My God, what are you doing?
The result was a game that sold over 9 million copies, garnered universal rave reviews, won over 50 Game of the Year awards,
You love me! You really love me!
made a lot of console owners very jealous, spawned one of the most popular online multiplayer games ever, which is still being played today,
Wait, what the fuck? Clara!
and has been voted best PC game ever on no less than 3 separate occasions by PC Gamer magazine. This then led to a sequel that managed to better the original in every way, shape and form, which itself spawned 2 episodic updates, which we're still waiting for a conclusion for to this day, after being left on a huge cliffhanger. Most recently, Valve even showed the world how to do VR games by taking us to City 17 with Half-Life Alyx, a game which I'm still praying to the gods of Gabe they port to the PSVR 2.
You're gonna need a gun! Don't worry, it's unloaded. It's unloaded now!
At the turn of the millennium, it was announced that Half-Life would be coming to the Dreamcast, and would be utilising the power of Sega's Little White Wonder to give an updated version of the game, along with a whole new side story created especially for the Dreamcast. But what happened to this port of the game? What happened to this new, improved version of Half-Life with updated graphics and a whole new exclusive campaign? And would having such a top tier game in its library have saved the Dreamcast? Welcome to Fistful of Gamepad, I'm Rick, and this is my review of Half-Life on the Dreamcast. A casualty of console cancellation, or an impossible port? Announced on February the 14th at the Milia trade show for a summer 2000 release, Half-Life on the Dreamcast was developed by Captivation Digital Laboratories in conjunction with Gearbox Software and Valve. The game was initially at one point going to be developed by Pyrotechnics, a division of Sierra, where one gameplay mechanic was to have an alien-style radar in the VMU. But this was quickly canned when Sierra shut down Pyrotechnics and the reins were handed over to Captivation Digital. Described as even more extraordinary than the PC version, the game would feature, quote, several optimizations, including higher polygon player characters, dramatic lighting, and special effects to showcase the power of the Dreamcast, and deliver a fresh and exciting player experience for console gamers. As well as this was the announcement of a Dreamcast exclusive single player campaign, where you take control of Black Mesa security guard Barney Calhoun. This would later be titled Blue Shift, a reference to Barney's uniform, although I always felt that this title had even more relevance as the logo on the Dreamcast here in Europe was also blue. The Blue Shift custom campaign would be handled by Gearbox, who had previously impressed by developing the Opposing Force add-on. Even Gabe Newell was on board with the Dreamcast version, commenting that, quote, by partnering with Sega, our intention is to create an incredible new version of Half-Life that takes full advantage of Sega Dreamcast architecture. The announcement quickly spread throughout the gaming world, and it wasn't long before screenshots on multiple page previews started populating magazine pages. With DC UK, one of my Dreamcast go-to magazines at the time, stating that the game was confirmed for a September 2000 release, a mere 7 months after its announcement. They also highlighted that, at the time, there was no multiplayer option currently confirmed. This was apparently, according to an insider, so that they could ship the game before the launch of the PS2, with the plan to release the multiplayer add-on later on. A month before its planned September 2000 release date, official Dreamcast magazine did a huge 8-page preview of Half-Life, highlighting that the Dreamcast version is nearly finished, and that it's going to be bigger, better, and even more outstanding than the PC version. The article highlighted that Half-Life on the Dreamcast isn't just a straight conversion, but an entirely new game, greatly enhanced to make the most of the Dreamcast power. Writer Stephen Owen certainly seemed impressed with what he saw, praising the Dreamcast version's high polygon count, quicker rendering, and how every character's detail has almost doubled in size. Models were now far more lifelike and realistic, highlighting how the scientists' ties and lab coats have their own animation and movement, rather than just looking like they've been painted on, as in the original PC version. Owen stated, "It beats the PC version hands down." All this praise was accompanied with page-filling screenshots showcasing how amazing the Dreamcast version will look and how superior it'll look compared to the primitive in comparison PC version. They also scored an interview with Gearbox's Randy Pitchford, who gave an insight into what to expect from Guard Duty, the Dreamcast exclusive at the time, which would later be renamed Blue Shift. In the interview, Owen pressed Pitchford on the still yet unconfirmed multiplayer part of Half-Life, to which Pitchford replied,
"We've been working really hard on a multiplayer element, on Team Fortress and on Dreamcast vs PC games, but in terms of making a commitment we're still not there yet. It's a definite possibility that we will release Half-Life and then continue to work on the multiplayer aspect and release Team Fortress as a separate game. But still the ultimate goal is to get the whole thing working in Half-Life."
He also went on to say,
"I don't think we're going to allow ourselves to release the game without some form of multiplayer mode in there. Split screen is a possible alternative. We're definitely going to do something. I just can't make any promises yet about what form it will take."
The article closes with a, quote, tentative release date of September in the US, although this is subject to a possible delay by a few weeks longer for the publisher Havas and Gearbox to implement some multiplayer features. But the article remained very positive and predicted the game will be an essential purchase once it hits the shelves. September 2000 arrives and no sign of Half-Life on Dreamcast. However, Eurogamer releases an article that reports that Havas representatives have stated that the multiplayer part of Half-Life will be released as a separate game. While no proposed release date was provided for this release, Half-Life was still projected to release by the end of 2000. But don't worry, to make up for this late appearance, when the game is released, it will feature an additional bonus disc containing Opposing Force, Team Fortress Classic, and a version of Counter-Strike, which will more than make up for the slight delay. September also provided us with more information on Half-Life, courtesy of Martin Mathers. Yep, the former videator and guy who was on Games Master 3 times as a contestant and once as a commentator, who, in his 7-page preview in Dreamcast magazine, a magazine which I never bought, flies over to Texas for a press event on Half-Life for the Dreamcast. Mather's whopping 7-pager details how much better the Dreamcast version looks, how it's like the PC version but, quote, only better, much better, how the security guards now have actual fingers with which to push the keypads and buttons rather than just unanimated block fists, and how it's all been ported across to the Dreamcast, quote, without compromise. The recurring issue that was the multiplayer, or lack of it, was still there, as the version they played was solely the single-player game. As with official Dreamcast magazine, president of Gearbox Software Randy Pitchford was there at the demo event, and Martin's questions soon shifted from how much easier was it to program on the Dreamcast to, is the online multiplayer happening or not? To which Randy replied,
"Well, here's the thing. We've been working with Sega and we want the Half-Life multiplayer stuff done right. They're planning some sort of announcement about it and it's all going to be very exciting, which is why we're not talking about it because we don't want to blow it all. Sega and Sierra are planning something, so I've got nothing to do with that. What I can say is that from the beginning, there's been work done on it and it works to some degree. Half-Life multiplayer is a big part of the Half-Life experience, and that's why it's important to make sure that it's delivered properly on the console. I obviously know what the score is, but I'm not going to talk about it. It's probably better that you wait for the press release. I don't want to talk about it because it's very cool, but it's probably not a good idea.
And when quizzed on when Dreamcast owners will actually be able to get their hands on the game, Randy's response was,
"When it's ready."
But he remained positive and said,
"It's really not ready yet and there's still a bit of work to be done, but comparatively this game has done pretty well. I've worked on a lot of games that have been ported over from PC to console and some of the teams did quite a good job, but this is probably the best console conversion that I've ever been part of. It's also going to be pretty significant when it arrives, so I'm very proud of that aspect."
In a nutshell, hang on in there, it's on its way, it's going to be something special, and the best things come to those who wait. October 2000 rolls around, and it's a mixed bag on the Half-Life front. The game still hasn't shipped, and as revealed in a tiny 2-inch square story in the news section of official Dreamcast magazine UK, the multiplayer part of Half-Life has in fact been scrapped. But the game is expected to land on November the 29th, an actual date. And they promised a full review next issue, which never happened. However, in a GameSpot article in November of 2000, old Randy Pitchford was there, promising a second multiplayer-focused game sometime in the future. This game will solely be dedicated to the multiplayer experience and may even contain ports of the PC expansion packs. Quote the Pitchford,
"Now that SegaNet has launched, we can talk a little bit about our hopes to create a second Half-Life title for the system that focuses on the multiplayer games."
Pitchford highlighted that with SegaNet going live, they hope to release a second title, focusing solely on the multiplayer games, with discussions around including Half-Life Deathmatch, Team Fortress Classic, Half-Life Opposing Force Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, and even some of the more popular PC mods. They would even include Opposing Force as a bonus, if it was all viable. But all this will happen once Half-Life goes gold, and if SegaNet takes off. Eventually, after all the delays, the multiplayer speculations, and the promises from Pitchford, the time came, and the reviews for Half-Life started making their way out into magazines. Could Half-Life on Dreamcast possibly live up to the hype? Could it surpass the PC version? Could it give the PS2 a bloody nose and show the world that the Dreamcast is a console to be taken seriously? And could it hold its own against the competition and prove the naysayers wrong? The majority of the reviews at the time seemed to think so. Dreamcast Monthly, in their issue, gave Half-Life 9 out of 10, praising the game's enhanced graphics, better lip syncing, atmosphere, and utilisation and configuration of the Dreamcast control pad. And while this wasn't perfect, the game would support the Dreamcast keyboard and mouse when released. They praised Blue Shift, saying that this will be getting PC owners splashing out on a Dreamcast just to play this exclusive. They praised the enemy AI, saying that it made the game even more frightening than Resident Evil Code Veronica, and that the set pieces made the game a compelling experience. Not all was perfect though, as precision platforming and shooting were more difficult than they needed to be, and the lack of multiplayer was unfortunate. But the graphics, story and gameplay made up for this, and Dreamcast Monthly stated that Half-Life will be an essential purchase when it's released in November 2000. Computer and Video Game UK were equally as impressed, saying that the Dreamcast now has an FPS to call its own. They praised the level of interaction available within the game, the enhanced polygon count, details of the characters, the lighting effects, and that Blue Shift was very much a welcome addition. CVG did point out the lack of multiplayer was an issue, and that the controls can be frustrating, especially when it came to crouching and stealth sections, as well as the load times, which they pointed out break any tension and atmosphere. Overall, while not meeting the standards of the likes of Perfect Dark, CVG also regarded Half-Life as an essential purchase, giving it top marks of 5 stars. Dreamcast Magazine, on the other hand, while praising the graphics, sound and AI, slammed the fluctuating frame rate, declaring it amongst the worst they'd ever seen. Putting it down to poor programming rather than hardware limitations, they highlighted how the frame rate can be as silky smooth as 60 walking down a corridor, only to then tank to 20 in the same location with no enemies. These dramatic drops, according to Dreamcast Magazine, made the game unplayable in some areas. This, on top of the frequent loading screens that you're presented with, which were described as tediously long, also didn't garner much favour with the magazine, although they also stated that the game was programmed by Gearbox, which it wasn't. Overall, these issues, along with the lack of online features, even with the addition of Blue Shift, landed the game with a still respectable 81%, but the game was declared as more half-finished than Half-Life. The following month, in their November 2000 issue, DC UK declared, "This is how your social life will end," in their opening of their review of Half-Life, as they highlighted that everything works just as it did in the original, in this living, breathing world. Graphical improvements, such as more clearly defined characters and more atmospheric lighting, were all welcomed updates to the PC version. They praised the engrossing storyline and the mix of both action and scares. DC UK also praised Blue Shift, highlighting how it was much more than a cheap tacked-on cash-in, and that it's its own game with clear links to the main storyline, such as when you're waiting to be let into the facility, you see Gordon Freeman go by on the monorail behind you, or how if you look at the security monitors, you can see the sample being wheeled to the test chamber right before everything kicks off.
Good morning, Gordon.
Criticisms were aimed at the game's final act on Zen, which I agree with, as that was frustrating enough on the PC, as well as having to fork out for a keyboard and mouse to truly get the most enjoyment out of the game.
It's got a ball in it.
They commented that load times were on par with the PC version, and overall gave the game 9 out of 10, branding it an essential, pointing out that even though it could just be branded a fancy port of the PC version, much more care and effort had been put into it compared to the ports of, say, Tomb Raider or Resident Evil 2 on the Dreamcast. DC UK closes by saying, "This was a legend on the PC and it'll be a legend on the Dreamcast, one of the finest experiences that gaming has to offer." They also showcased Half-Life the following month in their Christmas recommendations article. Dreamcast Magazine's coverage of Half-Life after their 81% review now extended to nothing more than a release date, which was now scheduled for January 2001. Official Dreamcast Magazine, on the other hand, the magazine you would expect to be first with a review of Half-Life before any other publication, only provided a 3-page preview in their December 2000 edition. However, they didn't seem all that confident or have much faith in the release of the version they were playing, stating,
"We've been given a version of the game to play through this month. Right up until a week before deadline we were hoping that it would be a finished version, ready for review. But as the days slipped by we became increasingly aware that it just wasn't all shaping up. But what the hell, we spent hours playing it anyway."
Which then raises the question, was this all just BS from official Dreamcast Magazine, or was the version reviewed by all the other publications an unfinished version? Regardless of this, they praised the immersive nature of the game, raved about Blue Shift, and excused the absence of a multiplayer, saying it will be out next year. They even excused the controls and said if you play GoldenEye on the N64, this won't be a problem, and that you'll feel right at home with Half-Life on a Dreamcast controller. The article closes with the promise of a full review next issue, which never happened, or even appeared in any future issues of official Dreamcast Magazine. At the time, the US version of official Dreamcast Magazine was still touting the game for an October 2000 release, even though this magazine was released in December 2000.
Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
As 2001 rolls around, official Dreamcast Magazine UK still has yet to provide us with a review of Half-Life. What we do get though from them is a preview video via their February issue demo disc, thus quashing any concerns about Half-Life's future and reassuring us that it's on its way and it's gonna look and play great. The next main update we got here in good old Blighty was in May, where official Dreamcast Magazine reassured us that, despite many rumours of it being cancelled, Half-Life is still happening and will be out in late May or June. They pointed out that, despite their best efforts, they couldn't get an official comment from publisher Havas, but personal problems within the development staff had led to a 2-month delay. But don't worry, it's back on track, and what they did manage to get from Havas was a spokesperson claiming that the game will soon be ready for mastering, with the last week of May seen as a viable target for release. However, a release in June has also not been ruled out. Official Dreamcast Magazine stated that they had been promised a review code in time for the next issue, but they also stated that they had been promised this several times previously to no avail. So even they didn't seem too confident that they'd actually get to play it, and closed the article promising, at the very least, some form of an update in the June issue. Over on IGN, they had deemed it Half-Life Week, a week-long celebration of everyone's favourite genre-defining FPS. This included an overview of the game, a look at Blue Shift from the perspective of everyone's favourite Black Mesa security guard, Barney Calhoun. Day 3 was dedicated to comparing the original PC and the still yet unreleased Dreamcast versions, including a side-by-side screenshot comparison, highlighting that the PC version, due to its increased video memory, still looks superior compared to the Dreamcast version. They still focused on how the Dreamcast version's frame rate can still stutter and stall when the action intensifies, which does create a problem or three, along with the very long load times and the huge save slot real estate compared to the PC version. The week culminates with an interview with, yep, you've guessed it, Gearbox head Randy Pitchford, where he was still adamant the game was going to happen, but highlighted that while it's not been an easy job for Captivation Digital Laboratories converting Half-Life over to the Dreamcast, they've been able to use the power of the Dreamcast to increase the detail, texture resolution and animation articulation. Randy also took time to shoot down any hopes of a Counter-Strike port, saying,
"At the moment, we're totally focused on finishing the single-player game."
And closes the interview by saying,
"People have invented all kinds of speculation about it. I guess it feels kind of strange working on a title that so many people care about that they want to talk about it, even when there's nothing to talk about. But soon you'll be sitting down to play your copy of Half-Life for Dreamcast. Until then, just ignore the rumors."
So we could all breathe a collective sigh of relief, as all we have to do is just hang in there and the game will soon be out. Even British retailer WH Smiths was getting annoyed with waiting and had a dig at the delays in their listing of the game, but still had it penned for a June 29th, 2001 release. However, we were dealt a big dose of encouragement courtesy of GamePro in their June 2001 issue, with a review stating the game was available now. The glowing review praised the graphics, saying it looked better than the PC version, especially when using the VGA box. Controls were an issue, but easily resolved with the use of the Dreamcast keyboard and mouse, and the inclusion of Blue Shift alongside the base game made up for the lack of multiplayer. So all was looking good. Putting aside that the Dreamcast exclusive Blue Shift had now been released on PC before the Dreamcast version was even out, it didn't matter. We'd had a good number of reviews in magazines, although none of these magazines were the official ones, but that's okay, they'll arrive in time. And we've had multiple promises from Gearbox boss Randy Pitchford that we'll definitely get to play Half-Life, and to ignore the rumours of cancellations because that's just talk, that's just rumours. Yes, it's been delayed with no concrete release date given yet, but don't worry, we'll definitely be getting the game any day now. Shit.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
On the 15th of June 2001, Sierra released a statement confirming what we all, by that point, had come to realise, that Half-Life on the Dreamcast will not be seeing the light of day, and would become yet another third-party casualty of Dreamcast's discontinuation announced just 3 months prior. Citing changing market conditions, that would be the only explanation that publisher Sierra would give, and comment that it would not answer any other questions. This itself opened the floodgates to a myriad of theories as to why Half-Life was cancelled, when it seemed like it was all ready to go, and we'd had numerous magazine reviews. 3 days later, IGN wrote an article on the not-so-surprising cancellation, highlighting the dwindling third-party support for Sega's Little White Wonder, so much so that they reported that Capcom were even in two minds whether to release Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which, thankfully, they did. IGN were already speculating that Sierra may strike a deal with a magazine to release the game, or even release it online as a tax write-off, allowing them to cover production costs. This Sierra denied. The only other possibility of an official release would be for another publisher to pick up the game, but this seemed unlikely as Dreamcast sales by this time were very much dwindling. The cancellation announcement would have come as a bit of a shock to company DK, who own Prima Games, as they had already released the Half-Life Dreamcast Player's Guide into shops. So, you could pick up a Player's Guide for a game that was never going to get released. Incidentally, the Dreamcast Half-Life Prima Guide has become quite the collector's item these days, and goes for, frankly, silly money. So, the game remained unreleased, and another example of what could have been for the Dreamcast. Half-Life did see a release on the PS2 in late 2001, which included a co-op game called Decay, but no Blue Shift. PC owners would get the most complete Half-Life collection in 2002 with the Half-Life Generation Pack, which included Half-Life Game of the Year Edition, Opposing Force, Counter-Strike and Blue Shift. Apparently, the most complete version of Half-Life on the Dreamcast is framed in Randy Pitchford's office. Then, in 2003, a late build of Half-Life on the Dreamcast, numbered 1672, was leaked online. The build was dated 23rd of May 2001, about a month before the projected release date and subsequent cancellation. The game was fully playable and contained Half-Life, Blue Shift and the tutorial. In researching this video, I also found that there were two other builds released. There was build 1638, which is dated a month prior and contains small differences to 1672, and 1659, which was leaked in 2023 and is dated 15th of May 2001, and is almost identical to the 1672 build. However, for Christmas last year, my fiancée bought me a really nice repro of the game that at one point I thought I would never get to play on Dreamcast. So, the burning question is, how does it play after all these years? Well, firstly, we have to apply some context to this, in that this is a game that A, is nearly 23 years old, and B, was never officially released, and therefore could be argued was never officially finished. From the opening monorail journey in, you can see how impressive this game looked on the Dreamcast, and anyone familiar with the PC version will have felt right at home playing this port. Graphically, the game looks fantastic for the time, or would have definitely been able to hold its own against the PC version. The size and scope of the game is unlike anything else seen on the Dreamcast, especially in an FPS on the system. The upgraded character models, guns and lighting all look great, or would have definitely been a noticeable upgrade over the PC version. Similarly, the sound is every bit as good as it was in the PC version. Although, it doesn't seem as impressive compared to the PC version today, which has had regular updates and mods released, most recently last year for the 25th anniversary. When we come to the gameplay, things are carried over nicely from the PC, with the same action, puzzles and platforming. You smash supply crates for ammo, health and HEV items, and you're even treated to some nice little Easter eggs thrown in for good measure. You can also use the wall-mounted first aid and HEV stations to boost your health and armour. However, there are a few issues. Firstly, the controls. The only way to play Half-Life on the Dreamcast is with a keyboard and mouse. Don't even bother trying to play it with the control pad, as the Turok style controls of using A, B, X and Y to move and the thumbstick to aim just don't work here. There are too many actions and not enough buttons to accommodate them on a single Dreamcast control pad, which, let's be honest, as much as I love the Dreamcast, it never had a decent control pad to begin with. Using a mouse and keyboard, it's a case of night and day compared to using a control pad, as, let's be honest, it's what the game was originally built around. The only other issue is the frame rate, which can chug when things get very busy on screen, and it makes it difficult when you find yourself having to fend off a load of headcrabs or a squad of marines that are running here, there and everywhere. The frame rate can even chug if you have minimal enemies on screen, but there's a lot going on around you. A prime example of this being when you're making your way down in the huge lift and it's raining headcrabs. The combination of simply moving down in the lift can cause the frame rate to tank. Chucking some headcrabs on top of that are vying for your face, and the frame rate really suffers. There is an optional auto aim feature you can select, and this does help balance things out. The frame rate I'd say is at its most chuggy when you're on the alien planet Zen at the end, which was never my favourite level anyway, even on the PC version. I would have to agree with Chandra Nair's review from Dreamcast Magazine UK regarding the frame rate. While referring to it as, quote, amongst the worst that we've ever seen is a bit harsh, for a game as high profile as Half-Life, you will be expecting a constant 30 frames a second minimum. Now, let's get on to those load times. These were an issue for some reviewers, but not for others, and in my opinion, the load times in Half-Life are simply far too frequent and take far too long. The effect of this is that it disrupts the gameplay and the flow of the action, which ultimately ruins the immersion and the atmosphere that the game does such a good job in creating. If you die, you're looking at a 20-second loading screen before you're back up and running. When you start the game, before you even step off the monorail,
What I say? Monorail!
there are 6 loading screens, each ranging from roughly 12 to 18 seconds each. So you're roughly spending a minute and a half of the first 6 minutes of the game staring at a loading screen. And infuriatingly, these bothersome breaks in the game continue throughout, which can get so frustrating as you're playing. Now, I'm fully aware that we live in an age of SSDs and faster loading times, so that has to be taken into consideration.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
Saving the game is also not as easy as you'd expect. Yes, you can save it at any time, anywhere, but the game is very VMU greedy. Also, there are times where you can save your game with no issues and happily overwrite your previous game. Other times, the game will inform you that there's not enough space on your VMU and you have to delete your previous save before it'll let you save your current game. The best solution for this I found was to go into the game with a completely blank VMU. But again, this needs to be contextualised that we are playing a game that was never officially finished, and who's to say that these issues wouldn't have been ironed out if the game had seen the light of day via an official release. In Blue Shift, the originally intended Dreamcast exclusive, you play a security officer Barney Calhoun, and after turning up to what you assume is another normal day at work, must escape the Black Mesa facility once everything kicks off.
Nice of you to show up this morning, Calhoun.
Calhoun's story runs parallel to Freeman's, so much so that as you're waiting outside the facility to be let in, you see none other than our goatee-bearded hero go by in the monorail behind you.
What's it called? Monorail.
It's then here that you realise that when playing as Freeman in Half-Life, it's Calhoun, aka you, that you pass when you're on the way to the facility. You also see the mysterious G-Man at one point as well. As you make your way around the facility, you're treated to the same living, breathing world that you were in Half-Life, complete with walking, talking, whining employees going about their business.
Why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Every NPC can be interacted with, even if it's just to tell you to go away.
Well, it's about time. We don't pay you people to mosey around at your own convenience. Make this thing work so we can get on with this miserable day.
And you can hear passing conversations from scientists discussing things from the state of the facility to the chaos and carnage that's happening around them. Graphically, Blue Shift, similar to Half-Life, looks fantastic, and it's easily one of the best looking Dreamcast games. The updated graphics from Half-Life have been used here with updated character models, which, at the time, made the NPCs look more human and less gaunt looking. Even when up close, the characters still look crisp and detailed. Similar to Freeman's campaign, you break open crates for supplies and the occasional Easter egg. Similarly, the sound helps in making it feel like you're a small cog in a big machine, as you hear the droning background sound of machines and NPCs talking to each other.
Time? I don't have any more time. If I'm not able to get my report to the administrator in the next hour, then my job will be in serious jeopardy, and I'll make sure that mine is not the only one.
Even small details, like the creaking of toilet doors, all add to the immersion of the world. Also, gunshots sound powerful, and the crowbar lands a satisfying thud when it connects with enemies. Although, you are only treated to 9 weapons in Blue Shift, as opposed to the 14 in Half-Life. With the controls, similar to Half-Life, it's best to go with a keyboard and mouse combo, as they're a lot more intuitive and less frustrating than using the control pad. This then allows you to enjoy the game a lot more. Although, even when using the mouse and keyboard, the precise platforming of certain parts of the game can still be very tricky. While far from being buttery smooth, the frame rate in Blue Shift, even when the action heats up, doesn't seem to suffer the same slowdown that Half-Life did. But this is to be expected as the game was built to run on the Dreamcast. Load screens also seem less frequent overall compared to Half-Life, with the initial monorail journey in.
That's right, monorail!
With its 4 loading screens compared to Half-Life 6, is almost a whole minute shorter. But again, similar to Half-Life, the size and scope of the world you see on your journey in is really impressive. Similar to Half-Life, you have 3 difficulty settings to choose from, and you can save anytime, anywhere via the options menu. And from my time playing Blue Shift, there were none of the saving issues I encountered in Half-Life. The game is rather short overall and can be completed in 2 to 3 hours, and to be honest, as fun as it is, if I had the choice between this and Opposing Force, I'd much rather be playing as Adrian Shepard than Barney Calhoun. Playing Half-Life on the Dreamcast is a strange, surreal, and in some places a sombre and even disappointing experience. On the one hand, similar to Resident Evil 1.5, you're playing a game that never saw the light of day. So playing it is an exciting experience, as compared to Resident Evil 1.5, Half-Life was, apparently, all but finished, and what you're playing was done solely by the developers. So it is disappointing that we never got to see it released on Dreamcast officially, as I do feel it would have sold well, load times and all. Would it have saved the Dreamcast? Absolutely not. Even if it would have made its projected 2001 release date, the Dreamcast was long discontinued by then, and the PS2 had been out in Europe 7 months and was busy dominating. Plus, by that time, you also had the Xbox and the GameCube on the horizon, so the Dreamcast had even less of a chance. Would having the cancelled online features have helped? Possibly, as the likes of Phantasy Star Online, Choo Choo Rocket and Quake 3 showed that the online audience was there, and also how ahead of its time the Dreamcast was with its focus on online gaming. It's also clear from playing Half-Life that Captivation Digital Laboratories, although having done a fine job, were possibly out of their depth with converting Half-Life to the Dreamcast. While they may have done an effective job at producing tech demos for the Dreamcast, actually porting over a game as huge and complex as Half-Life as their first project was clearly too much for them. Time was never the Dreamcast's friend, and even die-hard owners like myself knew that we were running on borrowed time, and it was only a matter of time before Sega would pull the plug. So at the time, Captivation needed to get Half-Life out as soon as possible to capitalise on the absence of the PS2. Possibly if Gearbox were leading on the port, it would have been released sooner, with less issues, and then they could have followed that up with Blue Shift the next year. But alas, we'll never know. Randy Pitchford's increasingly frankly ridiculous promises and claims regarding the development and content of Half-Life also didn't help, and only sought to build up expectation on a product that could never be delivered. Of which one of my favourite comes from GameSpot's November 2000 interview, where Pitchford discusses the possibility of a second expansion disc that they hope to release once Half-Life is out. This disc would apparently have included Half-Life Deathmatch, Team Fortress Classic, Opposing Force Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, some of the popular PC mods, and Opposing Force. Hell, I'm surprised he didn't promise to port over Half-Life 2 while he was at it. Pitchford would continue this trend of making grand claims and promises about the content and quality of upcoming games from Gearbox, most noticeably Duke Nukem Forever and Aliens Colonial Marines. But we won't go into those.
Sir, what happened in there? We shit the bed.
Personally, I think Half-Life would have had a much better chance if it had been released on time and with all the initially promised online features. This way, you got the best of both worlds. You got an immersive, action-packed single-player game, a great new side story in Blue Shift, and then the option to jump online, utilising one of the Dreamcast's unique selling points. You also got a high-profile killer app months before the PS2 was released. Overall, Half-Life is a fascinating footnote in the Dreamcast's history, and an interesting insight into what could have been. And that just about brings us to the end of my review of Half-Life on Dreamcast. Please comment below your thoughts on the Dreamcast port of Half-Life if you've played it, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again.
That'll look nice in my trophy room.